Hello everyone and welcome to City Skylines with Industries. This is going to be yet another one of my attempts to play this game in some sort of creative fashion. I know I've started a lot of series of City Skylines and proceeded to abandon them rather quickly. However, this time I went ahead and recorded a few episodes ahead of time so that you guys, have some kind of guaranteed content to look at. A few things I do want to start while I sit here and faff about making this entryway from this outside road connection is kind of the goals with this series for City Skylines. Initially, I was going to do this pretty much as vanilla as possible, and that's still kind of the goal here. This first few episodes, I'm going to have very limited mods. We're going to basically be using just kind of the necessities, such as like move it, prop it up, place the growables, things like that. I'm also playing on not sandbox mode. I actually have a budget to consider. We will be taking into account the needs of the citizens. So while we will be detailing areas, making the city look somewhat believable in the long run, we do also want to definitely make sure to keep everyone happy so that the town can grow. We are using a custom map and of course theme for this. Nothing new when it comes to City Skylines. I'm going to have links to those in the description in this video if you guys want to use the same kind of map and scheme that I'm using here. But let's just kind of hop into it now. First things first, of course, lay out a lot of the road networks. Personally, I think I'm terrible at laying out road designs when it comes to cities. I think after a few episodes, it starts to be a little bit more cohesive and make a little bit more sense when we get buildings and parking lots and things kind of working together. But I'm not a big fan of just a grid kind of system when it comes to a town layout. I like to picture towns to kind of grow organically from almost like tree roots in a sense, right? Or like veins. And generally speaking, my philosophy to it is you have your main road and then you have your offshoots going off from that at odd angles. Of course, you can have a very planned city, but for older kind of East Coast cities, I find it to be a little bit more organic than our West Coast counterparts, mainly because we all started out as these really small settlements and just grew over time. I am basing this area slightly loose off of where I currently live outside the DC metro area. It is pretty urban when it comes to the downtown area, but then there's a sudden shift to kind of suburbs and things like that. So that's the overarching kind of goal and philosophy to this town layout. It's also going to start pretty small, and we are also going to be using industries, as you can see here. So main reason I'm wanting to hop back into City Skylines is because the Industries DLC did come out a long while ago. I recorded this back in November, so it's going to be a little bit of a test. I always thought the base game needed a little bit more control when it came to industrialization, and I'm really happy that they added this DLC. I think it adds a lot to the base game. The base game has never really been too hard to really play, but at least this way the base game actually gives us some better options for gameplay and things like that. So a lot of fields. We're gonna have storage containers, places for workers to stay. We're gonna hopefully provide most, if not all, of our industrial work through these industry DLCs rather than laying out just generic industry areas, just as a test. Of course, that could change later on in the series as we progress and demand kind of starts shaping the form of things a little bit more, and that is kind of where we're going to be going. So we're going to start with a small farmland here. Now again, I don't quite know how industries works. I could have probably done some research to that before starting this, but I also wanted this series to be a little bit of a learning curve. So, you know, we're just going to hopefully do our best. I'm happy that they added farmlands and you know, the forestries and just to increase not only our toolkit with vanilla, but the details that you can add are much more functional, right? Because we've always kind of had like farm buildings and things in the workshop, but now they actually kind of provide us with kind of unique industries, and I'm always a big fan of that. At this point, just going through and laying down to residential, you'll notice that I'm just kind of placing things randomly here at first. I was planning on plopping everything down by hand, and then you'll notice at some point we will just start laying down the large sections of residential, commercial, in areas like that, just so the town starts functioning, and then we'll start going back in and replacing those default kind of base buildings with more custom buildings. If I had to think of a progression of this series, it's kind of going to go from very vanilla to very modded. We're going to, you know, end up replacing a lot of these buildings through here with more items from the workshop, right? Some more kind of believable building shapes, structures, and colors, and that way just this whole thing becomes a little bit more realistic looking. I'm not the best when it comes to absolute realism to City Skylines. It's not really my thing, and even though I will be using a lot of mods and things to get some details in areas we wouldn't otherwise be able to, keep in mind that I'm not going to hand detail every backyard. I'm not going to hand detail, you know, every alleyway and street. It's just, to me, at a certain point, it becomes more of a time sink, and you don't really feel like you're getting as much done as you would like. So here you can see that, you know, we're going to just zone the main street for now, you know, the commercial main street. Another area that I'm also going to be basing this off of is not only kind of where I currently live here outside DC, but also kind of where I'm from in West Virginia. So, for example, I'm kind of from the area called Parkersburg. It is kind of an old, kind of rundown area of West Virginia now. There's really not a whole lot going on there. The downtown area is kind of interesting because most of the industries are kind of gone at this point, and there's a lot more kind of just commercial buildings left, and even that is sparse and really has moved to other sections of the town than the downtown area. So if you go downtown from where I'm actually from, there's actually not much there, which is kind of an interesting thing. So I wanted this first main street to kind of end up being kind of a rundown main street, low commercial, kind of more abandoned looking at some point, right? And overall just different. Here I'm just trying to mess with the cinematic camera. I don't think I've ever hit that button before. Adding some, you know, schools, gotta keep the RICO pretty happy. Was going to try and mess with the parking lot, try and get that lined up and everything. Prop it up at this stage. Apparently I failed to enable the advanced feature, so I can't get rid of the default parking lots at this point in the series. We will eventually be able to do so, thanks to you know, of course, Strict Toaster and everyone else that plays City Skylines, who I ask for tips and tricks, and they do assist. The community here is very similar to me to the Planet Coaster community. You know, very helpful. Everyone's kind of willing to share tips and ideas with each other, which is always wonderful. Looking from above right now, you know, it's really basic. It looks very much kind of standard City Skylines. As the series progresses, we'll you know, be adding parking lots, much more offshoots, more details, more of a build up of commercial to kind of more dense housing into the actual kind of base residential areas, some more forest and greenery items, and all this slowly over time kind of work together to make something, you know, believable, and that's kind of the goal here. Working a little bit on this park, kind of close to the elementary school, adding just a few details to it. Again, at this point, mod list is really small. We'll add some flower beds just to kind of shore up one of the sides of the park. I was a little hesitant on the random color of the flower beds, but I decided to leave it just as a little bit of a flair towards kind of randomness. You know, it's fine and nice to have, you know, a whole solid color of orange flower bed across here, but for me, I feel like it is you know, a little bit more interesting to have multiple colors going across there. Here, just, you know, replacing some of the repetitive buildings that you get when you do kind of zone out large sections of City Skylines, right? It doesn't really look too proper. You kind of, you know, don't get a good spacing of buildings. Everything kind of starts like stitching together a little poorly. So you can move it to make little shopping fronts and districts and make things look a little bit more grounded in reality. And, you know, you can do the same thing with residential and everything else. At this point, there is a little bit of conflict between, I think, the theme that I'm using. So we do end up changing that eventually, but the base concrete is this kind of gridded out kind of concrete slabs with very strong lines breaking it up. That becomes a little distracting, and so I do end up using Theme Mixer to replace that at some point. Don't know exactly when I do that, but when it happens, I'll point it out in the video. At this point, we're gonna add a little bit of a other industry area. This is gonna be the animal side of the farmland. Now, I made it a separate industry because I thought it would be cool to do so. I don't know if that really has a negative or positive impact to the functionality or how well the area, you know, makes a profit. Nothing like that. Again, I'm pretty much a noob when it comes to the overall, you know, balance of industries. So this is just kind of a test, see how things work, and you know, blend in. I don't like how the pastures are all 100% dirt. To me, that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense because, you know, growing up in West Virginia, and, you know, I've seen some fields and some countryside, and I can tell you that large, medium animal pens, unless they're just like small, maybe like chicken coop areas or maybe pig areas, they're grass. They're just fields. You know, you're not gonna have a whole bunch of animals in this dirt pen where they can't really eat unless you know, set out hay for themselves. So we end up changing that as well because it just kind of makes the area look not as lush, and that becomes a little bit of a bother for me. You know, I do like the dirt roads going through the countryside, and we are trying to use a mixture of roads in the series, right? So the main street is going to be a 4-lane avenue, and then we're going to get into kind of just standard 2-lane streets, and then the edge of the town is going to have more of an industrial road, which is one of the new road types from the DLC, which looks wonderful in my opinion. Very kind of small town America. And then dirt roads in between the farmlands. So you're gonna get a good progression of color, which I think is important, a good variety. I'm not a big fan of overly repeating items and steps through a city. Repetition to me it's accurate, you know, like, you know, when we visited Japan this year in October, every city we went to felt pretty much a copy and paste of each other. You know, the buildings were pretty much the same type of buildings. The signage was different, and the neon lights and how they interacted was different, but the building shape itself and the general town layout was very much just identical going through and through and through. So I don't like that personally from a design choice. So I try really hard to avoid that to my own detriment. I feel like maybe if I was a little bit more open to the idea of having repeating areas, I could probably get things done quicker and it still look fine. But I think that's just kind of a thing that I have to deal with sometimes when I play this game. So at this point, we're adding the southern section of town, kind of a little bit closer to the waterway. Some people might ask why I didn't put the main street just along the waterway, because, waterways are generally where towns kind of start from. I figured I was going to have a lot of industry along the waterway, or old industry, warehouses, things like that eventually. So for now, we're keeping the main street a little bit more inland and a little bit closer to the highway system, just so we can get traffic in and out a little bit quicker. And then, fill in some of the suburb areas, using, plot the growables, just to kind of make it look a little bit more dense, a little bit more sporadic than you might get, again, using just the standard brush it in kind of method. So I find that to be very effective, if not a little boring with the default assets here. And then once you fill this whole area in with trees, it starts to look very much like a suburb. I think a lot of people really underestimate how many trees are in a suburban area. Like if you go to just Google Images and you look straight down at a small town, most of it's trees. Like, yes, the city streets are very obvious and the homes are pretty obvious, but yards, unless you have like no trees in your yards, pretty much covered. You just see a lot of green mixing in with concrete, and I think that's a pretty good design language to keep when you are playing City Skylines here. At this point, our industries are making us money. We are in the green. We have spent most of our money, so we need to try and definitely maintain that budget. So we are going to add some more industry in the back here. Using Move It on some of the new industrial buildings doesn't work, by the way. You'll notice that I tried to move this pin away from the hill just so we wouldn't have such a sheer cliff here. But the fence, the default fence that kind of comes with that, stayed in the original location. I don't know if there's anything that I need to do to kind of change that or fix that, but for now we'll just have to kind of manually move it somewhere else. We're going to add grain silos and I think a bakery up here as well, so that we can start producing things with the items we are making. Some side streets, and you can really see with industrial areas that you're going to get a zigzagging of buildings. I kind of modeled this area after a section near my work location where there's a lot of traffic lights that just make no sense, or street connections that are just crazy. Like it'll be a 5-way street connection and then like a 20-foot section of straightaway and then another 5-way street connection, and it just becomes a hectic mess at morning rush hour or noon, lunchtime. It's kind of a fun thing to kind of represent with your industrial areas, is that they built these factories and they're like, okay, how do we connect it up to the main road? And they just kind of do what they can with the area as best to their ability, and that's about it. We got some storage facilities up here, and I wanted this area to kind of be the capstone to the farms, right? So we're gonna go from kind of country up across and then into maybe an old kind of grain processing center that was built nearby, just to keep traffic and supply lines pretty close together. I'm also going to be shutting off a lot of truck traffic through the town, so they have to go through the industrial road on the north. It's going to keep sound low, keep our citizens happier. Even me growing up in a small town in West Virginia, we had I think Fenton Art Glass, which was a very traditional old school kind of hand blown glass plant, and trucks would have to come in and deliver, sand and other materials, but they would just ban truck traffic throughout town except for like certain routes, just to keep them out of the suburbs. So at this point, this first episode is done. I'm probably a little rambly, but I'm a little rusty when it comes to making videos, so forgive me for that. We're gonna end this little series with just some panning shots over the farmland. I think the farmland right now, it's kind of the best area. It's kind of the most finished area. Everything else, all the homes, businesses are kind of temporary, just so we can generate money so that we can spend it on industrial areas, because they are a little expensive. They're not the cheapest thing to put down. Some of these buildings cost quite a lot, between like $50,000 to $100,000, and you only have a $700,000 budget to start out. Here's some good shots of some of the traffic going through and turning around. And over time, hopefully, you guys will get to see some more mods and more interesting things added. If you guys want, you can subscribe to this channel for more creative goodness such as this. Hit that like button. Leave a comment down below on things to add. Might be a little bit, because we do have some pre-recorded episodes to get through first. And follow me on Twitter for just channel updates and other things. Say hi, and I'll see you all in the next video.